Hello, Vincent Carroll speaking. This tutorial is on irritable bowel syndrome and exploring the comparisons between the Western medical concept of irritable bowel syndrome and the TCM concept of the same. Irritable bowel syndrome is a modern word. You won't find that word in the historic Western medical textbooks, and the reason for that is prior to fibre optics, the word irritable bowel syndrome probably didn't exist. That's simply because when fibre optics came in, it was possible to internally examine the rectum and bowel by direct observation, with the expectation that you would find something to cause the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, such as a polyp or even a carcinoma or a tumour. But usually nothing was found. So the fibre optics would say, well, we found nothing, but yet you still have your signs and symptoms, so we have to put a name on it. So let's call it irritable bowel syndrome, because pathology in the real tangible sense has been outruled. So on the one hand, the person views themselves as lucky, there's nothing there that requires surgery. On the other hand, they're left with their symptoms, the very same symptoms that they came in with. Irritable bowel syndrome, therefore, is very poorly understood from a Western medical point of view, and indeed many people describing irritable bowel syndrome, it means different things to different people. So I would explain irritable bowel syndrome in terms of people having a predominantly sluggish bowel or a predominantly rapid bowel, or a combination of both. Very often in true irritable bowel syndrome, it's a combination of both, but it may be more a sluggish bowel or more a rapid bowel. So you've got to sort of understand that from the patient's perspective, what they see as the difficulty. Sometimes people are unable to go out if they don't know where there's an available bathroom. I know during the COVID era, during all this lockdown stuff, that was a particular difficulty for a lot of older people, because they knew where the bathrooms were and they knew the bus taking them into town wouldn't have a bathroom. So therefore they depended on getting around town by various bathrooms, and the bathrooms of course were closed during COVID. So things like this can have quite a devastating effect on the lives and the achievements of many people. Irritable bowel syndrome, from our point of view, tends to be liver qi stagnant in the lower jiao. When liver stagnates in the lower jiao, it affects the various systems found in the lower jiao, such as the gynae system, such as the urinary bladder system, and of course the digestive system as well. And this tutorial is just about the digestive system. I hope to make other tutorials on the gynae and urinary systems later on. So for the digestive system, you have the qi being stagnant in the lower jiao, which is oppressive. It oppresses the fine peristaltic motion of the gut, creating a regularity, which now is interfered with by the presence of qi. And that often comes across by having a bloated abdomen, because of course the abdomen, unlike the chest, doesn't have a rib cage, so therefore has the capacity to expand. But in expanding so, it affects the fine movement of the peristaltic movement of the muscles of the large bowel, and indeed the small bowel as well, but mainly the large bowel, because that's where the feces is stored prior to evacuation. And therefore, if the qi is stagnant in that area, very often the bowel can become very sluggish. Equally, if the qi then comes off and starts flowing again for whatever reason, maybe the person from a psychological point of view has received a bit of good news, then the qi starts playing catch up. It starts moving and the bowel might become rapid. So in other words, there can be this rolling phase between a bowel that is rapid and a bowel that is sluggish. But I find most people coming to me who speak in terms of their liver, of their irritable bowel syndrome. For most people, it means predominantly a sluggish bowel with some rapidity, but overwhelmingly for the majority problem to be the sluggishness of the bowel. And that tends to be because of the solid formation of qi becoming stagnant in the lower jiao. For some people, as I said, the qi can move and then the bowel moves, but for most people it remains quite solid, and therefore the bowel doesn't move. So irritable bowel syndrome can cover a multitude. From a Western medical point of view, though, it's very important to try to determine if there is what is described as altered bowel habit. From a Western medical point of view, if a person gets altered bowel habit, it is carcinoma of the bowel until proven otherwise. Thankfully, it is usually proven otherwise, but it must be investigated. That is to say, se, if there's no change in diet, no change in circumstances, no change in anything, but the bowel habit itself changes, maybe there's an intractable constipation, maybe there's a sudden irritability for no particular reason, then in that case, from a Western medical point of view, it is a carcinoma until proven otherwise. So questions must be asked, such as unexplained weight loss, such as blood in the stool, or even a lack of energy, because that can mean a lack of hemoglobin, and very often occult blood or bleeding per rectum when the blood is high up is not recognized when it is evacuated, so that can lead to an unexplained anemia until of course it is explained, and that's very often due to a bleeding tumor. So you need to be careful on that one. But for the most part, the chi simply is stagnant. The chi needs to be moved. So what do I do? Well, liver 3, gallbladder 34, of course, are my favorite points, but you must needle local points as well. And I'm inclined to needle low down, usually on the left side over the colon, maybe stomach number 27, 28, 29, and one soon lateral to that, there's another set of points from the Japanese tradition of acupuncture, which I call extra 27, extra 28, extra 29. On the left side, I use electroacupuncture, usually at a very low voltage for maybe 5-10 minutes to stimulate the gut as well. And I advise anybody who's doing that to make sure that your clinic is equipped with a bathroom, because sometimes the results can be quite immediate. But it's a useful thing to do for somebody who has quite intractable sluggishness of the bowel due to liver chi stagnant. But again, you have to move the liver chi. And of course, any system of medicine just gives a window of opportunity to find out what the overall problem is, and there's probably some mental, emotional reason why the liver chi is stagnant, so the person probably ultimately has to address that. But acupuncture provides that fire break to get the gut into a normal pattern, to allow the person to sort out why their liver chi is actually stagnant. So liver 3, gallbladder 34, needling locally over the large bowel, stomach 27, 28, 29, plus extra 27, 28, 29, maybe stomach as well, 44, as a spring point to the stomach channel is something that can be done. If there's pain involved in it, then why not the accumulation point of the stomach, which is stomach number 34. But I would very, very rarely need to use that, because it's more a discomfort that the liver chi stagnation is causing. And of course, the social, I suppose, disadvantage of having an unpredictability when the bowel is very, very active. Anyway, thanks very much.